All right, guys, so I'll be getting started here in a second. If you're watching on YouTube, I am working on getting my Instagram live going, so bear with me one moment. And that will get us all going on the same page. All right, so as we get on to Instagram Live as well, first off, this video or live series is brought to you all by, of course, weaverarborist.com, gaparborsupply.com, and justsenditsols.com. I've got a bunch more stuff coming up through all of those to review and see what's going on with that. But today, as I promised last week, we are going to be talking a little bit about the methods that I use and that I use to consult others with about selecting the appropriate tree service equipment for your company. So this is really subjective though, and these are just simply suggestions. When I do like consulting work and things, I try to help people have an idea of what to get and give them key points to think about and things like that, because I can't determine how much effort you're willing or not willing to put in physically to your company and what is worth it or not worth it. You have to make that decision. But what I do find, and something that I've worked really hard to do from day one, is to fight against the trend of buying popular equipment simply because it's popular. Now, there is some popular equipment out there that merits the popularity and that genuinely is beneficial for people. Okay, so don't misunderstand. I'm not just like trying to buck the trend 100%. That's not my point. Some things are trendy because, well, let's face it, they are pretty much um, game changers for all of us, right? For instance, the chipper, right? Having a chipper for most is not really that much of an option, even though some companies do start out without one. And there's some pros and cons to that as well. I started out without one and then I moved up and bought one and things like that. So, yeah, I don't want you to get the wrong idea. I'm not going to like be bucking the trends here. I'm just going to try to help you figure out what you might want to buy, um, depending on what you're doing and what you might need, right? So sorry, I'm typing on in YouTube right quick. All right. So yeah, one of the things that I think that should require a little bit more thought about, that it seems like people just do because it's the trend, is buying a mini skid. And we'll start with that one because it's really, really popular to buy. And I'm going to go through a little bit of analysis with you. So if you have a big enough company and you make enough sales, then a mini skid is totally worth it, without a doubt. Okay, without a doubt. But there is a line where it might not be worth it. Um, and let's talk about a few things that would determine whether a mini skid, for instance, would be worth the purchase for your company or not. So, one thing that I think you should know before you get started is a lot of people focus on the cost of the piece of equipment, and that is important. But every piece of equipment you own has additional cost to it, and I don't just mean maintenance. That's a whole repairs and maintenance is an additional cost that's kind of hard to determine. You can kind of build in a buffer for that, but it's kind of hard to determine. But the fact of the matter is that there are additional costs beyond that. For instance, a mini skid. Um, Depending on what equipment you have with you, how big your company is, can you haul the piece of equipment like a mini skid in one go? Or do you need a new trailer to go with the mini skid? So now you have the mini skid plus you have a new trailer. Okay. Where are your average job distances from where you live or where the equipment is yarded? So if the equipment is on the other side of town and you use this piece of equipment regularly, let's say, or you want to use it regularly, but most of your jobs are way away from the yard, then you have to try to figure out, is it worth hauling it back and forth that distance? Or is it more practical not to spend the money on the piece of equipment and do it manually, depending on the circumstances? If you buy another trailer and now you have that piece of equipment on the trailer, how is that going to affect you getting to the job? How many trips will it take? Or are you going to have another guy driving a company truck to haul it? Okay. So for medium to large size companies, that's not a big deal. Usually you have an extra truck around. You might even have an extra trailer already around. And there you go. You've got what you need for that mini skid. So adding the mini skid literally is as simple as adding the mini skid to the fleet. If you are a smaller company though, and you are running a box truck with a chipper or a chip truck with a chipper and you have an extra pickup, now you might only need to buy the trailer and the mini skid. So that's still not possibly too bad. But like in my setup, because of the close quarters that we deal with and that kind of stuff, oftentimes I am trying to get a trailer into tight backyards. So instead of using a box truck or a chip truck because people don't want me driving across their yards with chip trucks, um, I have to use a trailer. So now I have a trailer and a chipper that both have to be hauled. So if I buy a trailer for a mini skid, then I have to go back and make an extra trip for that. Or if I haul the mini skid on the trailer and I end up needing to, or I fill up the trailer, then I have to go back and get the mini skid later. So there's always a balance between what it is that um, the practicality of how much time you actually save on the job with that extra piece of equipment versus how much time you'll lose by going and getting it back and things like that if you have to do a whole bunch of shuffling. Not to say that the mini skid wouldn't make your job faster, it might. And it might make you be able to get to more jobs. It very well could. But it could be that the amount of time you actually save in the end with the extra trips involved and that kind of stuff may not be as valuable as you think is all I'm saying. So it's good to think about what you're going to potentially buy and what the realities of the logistics are. And that's with any piece of equipment. I use the mini skid because it's really common for people to want to buy a mini skid. And me and Tree Strider, Josiah talked about it, and they're super handy. And in fact, they're so handy that for me, it was more practical to put like forks and stuff on my stump grinder and turn it into a semi mini skid kind of thing over not having one. But for me, with the limited vehicles that we have and the limited crew size, it's just two of us right now. And we both drive trucks, and my trailer, the dump trailer, is what I chip into. Um, Plus, the stump grinder that I use, I don't use on every job. I use it on like every fifth job, even as like the carrier for wood. And the extra trips, like my average job is somewhere around 35 minutes from my house one way. So for me to make an extra round trip and get the mini skid, if I owned a mini skid back on the trailer and back, I'm still losing a couple of hours out of the day. So did the mini skid help me out enough? Well, that's always a question. Which is like for me, one of the big things is a lot of the clients I specifically get are clients with sensitive yards. And they come to me because they've heard that I take care of um, the yards, right? So they won't even let me drive a mini skid on their yard without having like those ground protectors. And if you have the ground protectors, then you have to have a bunch of them usually, or you have to keep moving them, and it's a whole nother process. So I have one. I use it a lot in certain ways, but it sits a lot too. So I couldn't even guarantee it making its return. If I had to have, if I had bought a mini skid, I'd still own a stump grinder. So now I'd be paying for two different pieces of equipment, and um, then I'd still have to transport them. Plus, I'd have to have ground protection, and the costs exponentially. I mean, ground protection, plywood's not terribly expensive. It's about $65 for 3/4 inch right now, with everything the way that it is. But it's still up there a little bit. And so you have the excess accessories that you have to run your equipment, right? Brian with BZ Arbor Care says, "Woo, this is a topic I'm really interested in. Does your chipper fit in your dump trailer?" No, it does not fit in my dump trailer. So we have to haul it separately. I can in Colorado, I can train or double haul, as they call it, trailers, but um, I have to kind of know where I'm going first, because when you have a 15-foot, which I have a small dump trailer for a very specific reason because of the yards and things that I'm in most commonly. Um, and then you have a 20-foot long chipper on the back, which is 35 foot. It oh no, what was that? Yeah, 12 foot plus 20 is, yeah, 32 foot. It gets to be a bit long for certain maneuverings in certain neighborhoods. So I kind of have to plan out my routes before I can double haul those trailers. So for that extra piece of equipment, I still have to have yet another trailer. And that extra trailer is going to cost me another 4 grand approximately for a decent trailer. I've tried the cheaper trailers, they tear up, and that becomes a problem. Um, BZ Arbiter says that is something I'm sitting on the fence about: dump trailer chipper combo or just a heavy duty dump trailer. Um, so I did have a dump trailer and a chipper that fit in it. The problem was for me is that the chipper was so light duty that it wasn't worth it. I ended up wearing out the chipper faster. Good thing I bought it used. I only paid $6,000 for the chipper. It was a 6-inch chipper, and it just couldn't keep up with the work that I did with it. But it did pay itself off. Okay, so a dump truck, yeah. Um, for me, I could run that route. I could run the route of having a chip truck and having the chipper to the back of it, which is the most common thing. And once again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but like one of the guys that I know in town that does that, if he wants to be doing work on a sensitive yard, then he can't drive his truck on the property, because him coming on the property with the truck's only like, depending on what kind of truck he has a full ton with a chip box on the back, and the truck is like, I don't know, 10,000 pounds maybe, with the box and everything on it. But when he leaves, the truck is much heavier, and he often leaves divots and ruts in the yard pulling out, and that's where people get upset. For some strange reason here, um, they don't bury irrigation lines very deep. So if the yard is soft at all, you can actually crush them, and that's a whole nother problem. A lot of people have had problems with that. Plus, a lot of people, my clients, they're very finicky about how their yard looks, and they don't want divots in it or ruts in it. So that's another challenge. Um, Me personally, I don't want to deal with the CDL stuff. I don't want to deal with all the large truck over standard weight hauling issues and all the checks because it's almost impossible. If you've ever run a CDL truck, it's almost impossible to keep them up to date. There's always something that the DOT or the state patrol is going to find wrong with your truck, and they tend to pull you over a bit more with those CDL kinds of trucks. Uh, so for me personally, I just chose not to run CDL, and I don't like it. Plus, most of the jobs, once again, I'd have to park on the street, and that's extra distance for me to have to haul brush, and that's where the whole adapting my stump grinder and thinking about a mini skid came from the idea of getting into yards and getting brush. But then I realized it mini skids, any kind of like track skid driving machine is going to tear up the yard a little bit, more so than a wheeled machine as a general rule. That's where like Avant now has those center pivots, and I think Vermeer just bought a company that has center pivot tractors and stuff, and those do help a bit. But once again, you start to get into heavy weights on those pieces of equipment very quickly. And the wheeled front end loaders that are mini loaders and stuff like that are still pretty heavy. So depending on the yard, it may or may not mark it up. It gets That's all the things you have to evaluate. What kind of tree service are you? What kind of yards are you getting into? And how much is the actual practical value for you? Like, um, so I'll give you an example for me, not talking about the practicality of the equipment on the yard, for instance, but the practicality of equipment time used versus time gained. Okay, so a lot of stuff that I do is very large canopy, large wood tree pruning. A lot of heritage trees out here that I'm working on. And so I'm just taking off a branch at a time around, dead wood or whatever, or a lead that needs to be removed because it's splitting or whatever and it's impeding or whatnot. Okay. So oftentimes my groundy is helping me as much as he's doing groundwork. Therefore, the piece of equipment actually doesn't get used quite as much during the day as you would originally think because my groundy is running ropes for me, sending me something up or getting something from me just because of the nature of pruning. It's not like just removal work, right? Refilling my saw, which isn't, I mean, that frequent, but you start adding all these little tasks, and that's like a good third of the day he's standing there that piece of equipment's not getting used. Fine. So you say, well, when he does use it, it makes up that third of the day. Okay, fine, it does. But the challenge then is with us being two guys and the work that we have to do, is that very practical? Is he going to be able to do that on every job? Well, no. A lot of the jobs that we have, you can't get that equipment in, not because the yard being sensitive, but because we live in an area where the landscaping style has a lot of steps in it, has a lot of narrow passages, and has a lot of steep inclines. So that equipment can't get into that yard anyway. So now you're factoring in how many jobs on average can I use it on versus I can't use it on. Well, as a climber, I get called out to a lot of jobs that other tree services with lift buckets and stuff can't get out to. So that means my equipment can't get out in the yard either because they're hiring me to get out there because the other tree services equipment can get out there either. So then I have a number of days a month that piece of equipment is not being practically used on the job site. With that being the fact, how many days a month do I have to work to pay the payment on that piece of equipment? And how many days of work am I actually making money on the equipment versus paying it just to pay itself off, if that makes sense? It gets to be kind of complicated, and that's where like really the consultant thing comes in. Not that I'm trying to push that with you guys, I'm just trying to explain because then we start talking about how much you charge a day, what your income is, what your expenses are, what kind of addition that expense of buying the mini skid will add to your company, and so on and so forth. Now, let's contrast that real quick to just a chipper. We're not going to talk about running a chipper into a dump trailer or a chip truck just yet. We're just going to talk about the chipper. Is it a value to buy? All right. So um, this becomes a little bit easier, and I'm not saying it's for everyone, but it does become a little bit more of a no-brainer at some point. Like guys who are just starting out with their own business and trying to do like weekend work or in the evening work may find that a chipper isn't practical for them at that moment because chippers aren't cheap. I mean, I bought mine, it had 217 hours on it or 211 hours on it. It's a Vermeer BC 900 XL. So it's a 9-inch chipper, which for me is like the perfect size. I could have done with a 10 or 12 inch as well, but for the value, the price per the function, this was perfect for me. I couldn't really beat the deal, and I still paid $22,000 for the machine being slightly used and having a year warranty and it being a 9-inch machine, which was, you know, really that first step into professional grade machine. The 700 series, I don't even know if they make that anymore, but the 700 series is kind of still like semi homeowner. It's like the prosumer model. Um, but I do know some tree service companies running a 700, and a 700 would be a good entry level machine for companies if you don't have one at all, just because of the price point and all that. So why is a chipper such a value to a company? Well, first off, it's rare that you're not going to use a chipper on a job. And the thought process behind that for me is you're either going to be dragging the brush out of the backyard onto a trailer, or you're going to be dragging it out of the same backyard to the same exact spot where the trailer would be and running it through the chipper. On top of that, while the con is you do have to haul a chipper and a trailer or have a truck set up for the chipper, right? Um, the con is that now you have to try to manage your equipment, how you're going to set that up, like I mentioned. But the pro is all that brush that's being really fluffed up and really hard to compact down. And yes, we've all saladed or slash cut, whatever you want to call it. It still doesn't get as compact as chipping. There's a lot of empty space in a trailer when you've done all the cross cutting and salading that doesn't really work out to the same as when you are chipping, right? It just way more compact. So you get a lot more of the brush into one container and hauled off all at one time. Okay. And then on top of that, you can work brush through a chipper a lot faster than you can get brush on a trailer and try to make it compact on the trailer. Okay. Um, and that's another point, Devin. Devin says, and nobody will take brush for free like they will chips. And that was the next point I was going to mention. Once you have all your brush down into chips, it's way easy to get rid of. People either want it for landscaping, they want it for muddy areas, they want it on top of worn out gravel that's kind of been impacted into mud. And so almost always somebody will take chips, or they want it for compost heaps. Um, that so when you look at it like that, you can see that essentially the cons are only that now you're paying for a piece of equipment, which is your chipper, but you're clearly making up the money in what you're spending per month in the chipper by saving the time. I mean, I've done it both ways. There is no way you can make me think that owning a trailer and not using a chipper is more economic when you're booked with work. Because if you're that booked with work, you should be able to afford the chipper and you'll get to the next job even faster. I mean, plus now you're not having to pay as many dump fees and all that stuff with the chips as you were with the brush. And if you have a lot where you're dumping brush that they let you dump for free, or you pay a monthly fee and you're dumping there, you're still consuming probably 2 to 3 times more space with your brush per year as you would with the chips. Because most commonly, you're going to have multiple loads of brush that you're going to have to dump. And most commonly, you're not going to be able to get the brush on top of each pile. You're going to have to dump it in front of the pile. So it starts to extend out. While with chips, you're going to have to do the same thing, but each pile is like two of your chip or your brush piles in one chip pile. So you're saving huge amounts of space on where you're dumping. And even if you have to dump at the dump and pay, you're only paying, you're still probably paying tonnage, but you're only having to drive there most likely once, maybe twice per job versus how many times with the trailer and paying per, you know, the just the trip time. So, um, I mean, even for me starting out, it was kind of hard to see how I was going to make the payment on a chipper, and I was really nervous about buying a chipper because I didn't want that extra expense. I didn't want that. But now, I mean, it'd be hard to live without one. Yeah, I would, even if I wreck this one and insurance didn't cover it, which it should, something happened to it, I would make a way to buy another chipper. It's just like for me, it's absolutely necessary to be productive. So that's one way of looking at it, right? And that's probably the most common de- like item somebody's going to look at buying is a chipper. So, can you live with a small chipper? Yes, you can. Um, but it does limit the practicality of certain scopes of work. If you're going to do a lot of like fine pruning and do a lot of small pruning and removal, then a chipper. Yeah, BZ Arbor Care. I'm sick of manually unloading brush. Yeah. Um, Very true. I get it. And a small chipper will work to a large degree, but a small chipper has a lot of problems. And while it is slightly faster, I find that you have a lot of feeding issues, and it's probably not as practical. Um, if I hadn't gotten my 6 inch for so cheap, I wouldn't have bought it. It wouldn't have been value oriented at all. Um, I think that a a basic entry level chipper for a tree service company should be a 9 inch chipper minimal. Um, if you're running a like 550 or something like that, a big truck, 550 or larger, then a 15-inch chipper and up, diesel or something like that might be a good option for you. Uh, but if you're running smaller than that size truck, even a 350, it'll haul easily a 15-inch chipper, especially like a diesel or a gas engine. But they are very heavy and wear on the truck really hard, braking and towing wise. You're going to wear your drivetrain components and braking components really bad. Matthew says, I've been renting chippers, but most of my clients some want to, or if most of my clients want to pay for the rental. Yeah, that's an option too. You can do that. There are some tree service companies that run a really light equipment style, and they don't haul wood or brush off site. Uh, it keeps their overhead down, but it does limit very to a really large degree the clients that are going to use you. A number of my clients were suckered in by the price to have companies leave the brush and wood, and then they realized how much work it was, and they said, we'll never do that again. So in your bid, I wanted to make sure that you're bidding to haul off brush and wood. So, I think that even if you get somebody to take your work that way and you do a big job for them, it's only going to be once, maybe twice, and then most people are like fed up. I've had a number of people say, "No, I want to keep the wood. I'll get rid of it on Craigslist or Facebook because I want the cheaper price." Then they put it on Facebook or Craigslist, and they have like no calls at all, or they have a million calls, and people keep coming out and look at it and say, "Wow, that's more wood than I want." Or the worst is somebody comes out and says, "Yeah, I wanted free wood," and they take five cuts, and then they don't want any more, and it frustrates the client a lot, which it would frustrate me too. So I understand. Um, Matthew says, "So I owned one. So if I owned one, then I might be." I'm sorry, Matthew. I don't understand. Can you restate that comment? I didn't understand that one. Brian with BZ Arbor says, "I own a chipper but lack a truck or trailer. Been having. I own a chipper but lack a truck or trailer. So that's my next step. Been saving. That's my next step in the next month or so. Finally ready to upgrade." Yeah. So I will tell you this, Brian. If I owned a 5 by 10, let's see. If I owned a 5 by 10 trailer, I'm pretty sure that my chipper would actually fit inside that trailer. But it becomes a bit more of a challenge than just that. You have to have a way to haul it in there. And what I found is that it's a little bit more challenging because when I had the little 6-inch chipper and I was pulling it up inside my dump trailer, it was a little bit more of a challenge to get it in there because it always wanted to tip over backwards while it was coming up the ramps. It can be done. You just have to figure out the method to the madness. And I found that it really takes some finagling to get that to happen, if that makes sense. And either way, you're still making two trips because you're either hauling the trailer with the chips and debris and then leaving the trailer, or bringing the trailer back empty and grabbing the chipper. So either way, doesn't make much sense. Doesn't make much difference in that sense. But if you have a truck and you can, blow it into the back of that. I do know one guy in town, well, two guys in town, they put hydraulic lift systems on all their pickups and then they just run 3,500 pickups with a box on the back to dump. Um, and you can buy one of those kits for like $2,500 from Northern Tool or whatever. But then you have to have it installed, and if you can't install it yourself, then it becomes a little bit more complicated. Brian says, "I have a 1,500, but it's not reasonable to chip into." Yeah, no, that's kind of small for chipping into. It can be done, but you would be running very limited. I would say minimal 2,500 truck and ideally a 3,500 truck. I run a 2,500 truck, but I don't haul in it. I don't chip into it. I just you run all my equipment in that, and then I have the dump trailer. Matthew says, "If I had to make a payment on a chipper that none of my clients wanted me to use, I could be losing money." Yes, very true. But once again, depends on your area. Like in my area, everybody expects you to do cleanup. They don't even Most people don't even want to look at paying for a tree service company that's not going to do cleanup. So having a chipper is kind of essential for being economical. Um, because if I don't have a chipper, they still expect me to clean up, and I'm having to essentially um, do the work, and it's taking me longer. It's slowing me down from getting on to the next job. So yeah, it's all based on what's reasonable. But here's what I would say to you, Matthew. I'm almost I almost guarantee you that you're underselling your work because the cost of what a chipper costs per month, you should easily be able to make doing tree work anywhere in the country for that monthly fee and still make money. I guarantee you, all the guys in on the East Coast. I think you're in New York. Is that right, Matthew? I don't remember where Matthew is. No, maybe you're I, Tell me where you're at again, Matthew. I don't remember. They all have chippers around you though, and they're not owning chippers to lose money. Just I'm not getting on to you. I'm just trying to help you see that. So keep that in mind, right? But in New York, I do understand that there's other situations. If you're in the city, where do you park your equipment? If you're upstate, still it can be expensive to have a lot or a property to park on. So um, that's kind of something to think about. Devin says I waited way too long before buying a chipper. Like Eric said, you lose a lot of time without one. Yeah, it gets hard. Plus, once again, let's go back to the conversation real quick that we had on what was it? Friday. Your body is a tool. The difference between a chipper and your body is that a chipper can be refurbished, parts can be replaced easily and cheaply, and you can have a chipper breakdown and have it up and running on as a general rule within a few days, right? Your body is a tool that cannot be repaired as easily. So whether you're running brush through a chipper or your hand stacking all that crap on a trailer, and then you're getting up there and you're slash cutting and almost cutting your legs and you're jumping up and down on it and you're lifting over your head a lot to throw all this brush on there, you're wearing your shoulders, your back, your legs, your knees, your ankles, everything out, your hands. And once one of those components goes bad, I guarantee you it's going to take you a lot more than a few days to recover it, to recoup it, if it can be fixed. It may be a lifelong problem at that point. So there is value in looking at what is a more expendable tool for your tree service company and paying the premium for that versus trying to save some money but wearing a more valuable, less easily replaced tool out excessively. Um, I don't know if that made any sense, but there is a value to that, which is why the mini skids are so common. So many people like the mini skids because now you're not having to, cut big 150-pound chunks and throw them on your shoulder and try to walk and throw them up in the trailer, right? The mini skid grabs it, can grab 600 pounds at a time or 500 pounds at a time, drive it over and dump it into a trailer, right? Which is why, even though I can't like pick up, I can pick up way more with my, yeah, Matthew, work smarter, not harder. But we're not just talking about smarter as in speed because that's what most people think about. We're talking about the value. That's what everything has to be based on, not price, right? Not just because it's cool, not just because it's particularly faster, but where is the value? And let me illustrate it like this. So if you have a mini skid, but it takes you so much time to move it around because your company's not set up for that. You have a bunch of jobs you can't hardly get the thing in and out of, right? And you're paying a ton of money on it. It's kind of like buying a track ready Formula 1 car that's not street legal. You've spent the money on this, however many $1 million worth of a car. You have a car that's an absolute beast. It's one of the fastest in the world, but yet you can't use it because you don't race Formula One. You don't have a team. So, was there any value in you buying that vehicle? Well, maybe if you're designing for a company and you can come up with a piece of equipment that will make it as value, they'll pay you the equivalent of that vehicle, or you can make more sales than what the vehicle costs you. Yes. But for it to just sit in your driveway and you have paid all that money on it, it doesn't matter how fast it is. It's useless to you. So there was no value in that, right? So that's where we come into where's the value in the equipment we buy. Like a chipper has a high value rating. A good solid pickup truck, even if it's a 2500 or a 3500, yeah, they're not cheap. The value level is really high for those pieces of equipment, without a doubt. Um, so once again, another piece of equipment that a lot of people want to talk about. GRCS, an amazing piece of equipment. I mean, amazing, really. You know, Zach Richards swears by them, and I know a few other people who do too. And they're great pieces of equipment. However, for me personally, the kind of work that I do isn't really big enough work to justify a GRCS. I won't ever need it or use it enough that it would be practical for me to spend the $3,500, at least not right now. Maybe in the future that could change. And if it does, then I'll reevaluate. But I did need something that would allow me to haul a little bit more and do a little bit better and make it more controlled. So I did buy the Stein 3001 with the winch on it. And it was half the price. And I've used it a few times and it's totally made its money back. But I still wouldn't have covered the cost if I had bought a GRCS yet. Not for the work that I do. And that's just how it is, right? It's there. Once again, where is that value? Um, I'm not saying that GRCSs aren't valuable. I'm not saying that they're not a good piece of equipment, and I'm definitely not saying you shouldn't buy one. What I'm saying is, for that kind of investment, it's good to make sure that the kind of work you do on a regular basis justifies that kind of investment in one piece of equipment that is very, very specific in use. It's not, it has, can be used in multiple ways, yes, but it's a very specific kind of way that it can be used in, if that makes sense. So is it worth the money? Well, that's once again something I'd have to talk to you about, kind of figure out what kind of terrains you're working in, what the scope of your business is, what you do most, and how frequently you do work that a GRCS would actually help you with versus just the Stein 3001. So that being said, I've taken off a number of full leads or half of a big lead with my Stein 3001 and done a tip tie or a um, balance tie and cut a face, cut an open face on the top, cut it and pulled it up and balanced it out and gotten it off of a roof of a house or whatever. Where I couldn't have done that work that fast without that piece of equipment. But once again, the Stein at $1,300 or whatever it was did the work with a little bit more complication, not quite as with as much finesse as the GRCS would, but it did it and it made my job way easier, way faster, and I still didn't have to spend the crazy amounts of money on the GRCS. Matthew says all depends on the work you do the most. Yeah, or how much time it takes you to do that once in a while job that comes up like every 3 months or every 4 months of the year, right? If I'm spending a couple of grand on something that comes up a couple of times a year, but every year, then yeah, it's probably worth it for me to have that piece of equipment because I can easily recover that because that kind of work I'm charging more for. Um, so Travis says, have you used a 5-to-1 or 3-to-1 mechanical advantage to tip top and lift? Yes, I have. They're not bad. I just find the ability to crank that winch and pull it up and then lock it off to be a bit more um, consistent in motion than trying to haul on a 5-to-1 or a 3-to-1. Now, I will say that a good 5-to-1 or a 3-to-1, you could get away with using the rope jack pretty easily, and it would be a pretty smooth and simple system. But the 5-to-1s, I just found you have to run the block up a lot, and pulling on them isn't quite as smooth for that kind of work as the crank is on the Stein 3001. Um, Plus, when you're lifting 3,000 pounds at a time, it's still a bit of effort with a 5-to-1 over what it is with that winch because it's got that gearing in it. So, yeah. Um, Brian says, I'm cheap. I use a porty with a alpine butterfly tied above it with a cable hand winch because I don't run into that often. Yeah, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I would recommend one change in that though, Brian. I would recommend that you put a English prusik, like a 4 or 6 rat prusik on the line and connect your cable come along to that instead of an alpine butterfly, because one day you could pull on that so hard that the alpine butterfly gets cinched off, and the prusik will not cause the reduction in break strength of your rope. Just something to think about. It would also depend on how heavy the piece that you're actually lifting is, just so you know. um, so one thing I will say about what we're talking about with the 5-to-1s, the mechanical advantages, the tip tying, the hauling up of material. I would say that most people run into situations where that would be way more time effective if they would do it that way, but because pieces become so long, people get scared of it more and they tend not to do it. But once you've learned how to balance out your pieces really well, once you have the right kind of equipment, whether it's a rope jack on a 5-to-1 or 3-to-1, or whether it's just the come along, um, I think that once you get familiar with that method, you can find that it will save you a lot of time if you just get in the mindset of, instead of chunking something down or blocking it off and letting it swing back in small sections to be handled by the porter wrap, you could just tip tie, take off that whole 20-foot lead all in one go. And even though it takes a bit of time to get it set up and cut, once you get familiar and comfortable with that process, it's way faster in the end, and it saves you money. Brian says, "Oh yeah, definitely. Thanks for the tip." And yeah, I did. I don't lift much over 1,000 pounds. When in doubt, go smaller is my philosophy. Yeah, I agree with that, Brian. However, Zach Richards, Zigzag Man, has really pushed me to look at efficiencies and what's actually possible. And I found that I tended to cut really small because of fear, when in reality there is plenty of room for me to cut much larger in that equipment to make its money for me and save me a lot of time. Because no matter how you look at it, cutting up, bucking up wood on the ground is always going to be way faster than chunking down pieces in the air. Um, just something to think about. Okay. I'm not trying to force you to do anything that you feel is unsafe or feel uncomfortable with, but sometimes getting past that comfort level is really important to be productive. I know that when I first started out, I like, for instance, another piece of equipment that's not that expensive that I bought that um, totally has paid for itself, a Captain Hook. Yeah, Travis says I agree. If you spend the money on the gear, you might as well learn to use it efficiently, and that's very true. Clayton, go big and go home. That's my motto, but be smart about it. Yeah, there's there is a time to chunk down in pieces, for sure. I'm not denying that, and we all should be very cautious about when we choose to skip that step to go big, right? Without a doubt. But there are times where it's totally feasible, totally safe, and totally practical to go really big, and it could like make the payday literally for you going big versus spending so much time chunking down. Um, so I've had a number of occasions where I've done exactly that. I had a cottonwood that had a big 25-foot lead over a house, and we debated a long time. For me to, there was no really good close rigging point, and everything was going to have to take a huge swing, and I had to make sure that it was going to come off away from my climb line and away from me so it didn't cross and pull me off. So it had to go one direction, right? It just had to. And I just didn't feel comfortable. And then the impact was going to like swing real far, and you hoped it would hit the trunk. If it didn't, it was going to swing past and whatever. So we ended up just tip tying, and we actually did a crow's foot tip tie. So we tip tied a higher point and a lower point just to make sure that the tip didn't break off and then the whole thing fall. And so we had a safety essentially on it. And then we did a wide, in that case, a really wide open cut. And then we back cut, and then it pulled over. And that was, it laid straight down. We bucked it up in like 5 minutes on the ground. It probably took us maybe an hour to get everything set and down on the ground and through the chipper. Where climbing it, it would have taken me an hour just to cut it up, and get it on the ground with the rigging and everything that we would have had to done. So it was way more effective, right? So yeah, there are times for that. Just be smart about it, and kind of figure out what's going to be. Um, yeah, Travis says butt line with a porter is an option. Yeah, so that is another thing. If I'm not real sure about how a big piece that I'm cutting is going to swing away, it's really simple to take another spare rope and rigging line and tie off the butt end, and then cinch it off to the trunk or cinch it off to that little stub you're leaving, so that it doesn't like take a massive swing out. And that way you can cut all the way through. It won't like fall real hard and swing back on you, because that line's only going to let it sit down a couple of foot, or whatever. So yeah, there's options out there for rigging in big chunks like that. I often, like on tip ties like that, I'll often use, so I use a weird setup for this. I will actually use a porter wrap in a tree with a redirect pulley to give me a better rope angle, and then I will actually run the rope from the tree for the guideline, that butt rope, as it's coming down to the guy on the ground, since there's usually only two of us. And that works really well. He's managing the full weight. I'm managing where the butt end goes and how we lay it down. Because if you let the butt end go too far out, sometimes it'll sit down and then want to rest back against the tree. So running that butt rope also helps keep it at the angle you want so that it hits the ground and lays over. So all of that comes down to the equipment that you have and what you're buying. So once again, I've invested in some expensive blocks. I mean, I don't even want to know how many thousands of dollars I have in rigging blocks. Probably a good $6,000 in rigging blocks. But it's because I buy very high end, and I buy ones that are appropriate to the size that I use and I need when I need them. Um, is that equipment worth it? It depends on what you're doing. I do a lot of large cottonwood removals and willow tree removals, and I do a lot of green cottonwood and willow tree removals. I do a lot of split willow lead removals that broke in the wind and now I have to get them down, and they're full of water, and they're 18 inches in diameter and 40-foot long. So those heavier weight blocks and stuff, yeah, they're important to me to have, and I think it's worth the money. Um, we'll do that in another episode, Matthew. Matthew asked, could you go more into using a porter wrap up in the tree? I'll do that in the next episode. We'll talk a little bit about rigging ideas, concepts, and methods in the next one. Okay. Brian with BZ Arbor Care says, did you get the DMM small rigging block? No, I actually bought the ISC rigging block. I don't understand DMM and ISC. They're essentially the same company. ISC, what I understand is ISC originally was DMM. DMM started a new company that's separate from DMM to uh, kind of have very specific designations on what was being produced and under what brand. But if you look at the forging and everything, ISC is essentially DMM, but ISC is a bit cheaper. Um, and I looked at the CMI and the ISC blocks because they were about the same size, about the same workload limit and things. But what I had heard is that the ISC block, the spring in it is way stronger for the cheek opening latch, and it tends to work a lot longer. Whereas the CMI has a weak spring that eventually wears out, and then it doesn't hold the pressure right. So your cheek plates could come open unexpectedly, which isn't good. Um, to give you an idea, some people told me they had been using the ISC block for like 7 years, and the CMI, I was told that a bunch of guys came back in 2 years needing the spring replaced. And the CMI isn't that much cheaper. I have ISC blocks. I have a big ISC block. I have a small ISC block. I have a Stein stainless steel block for certain applications that's kind of big. I have a number of other blocks that I don't even remember that I have. And then I have two or three Omni blocks 2.0s. And then I have, what's it called? Some pinto pulleys and various other things I use for light rigging. By blocks, I mean everything that I use that's within the rigging aspect of a pulley system. And I have a number of things that I use, like the rigging wrench and various other things. So, yeah, I've got a bit of money in all that. On top of that, I have a number of devices like um, rings. I have some rings now, and I have a safe block and a couple of other things like that. I need Brian says I need a negative rigging block. I've been getting away with a safe block, a couple of rings, and a natural crotch. Um, yeah, Brian, I get that. If you talk to Zigzag Man, he would say that that's all you need. 90% of everything Zigzag Man does is on rings only. The only reason that a block really helps overall is um, hauling up. Of course, it's not going to have any extra friction on it hauling up like a ring would. And also, rings, as you put more weight on the same ring and rope, it will act differently because the rope is going to flatten out a little bit more to a degree. So, but I think rings are really good options as well. So if you want a rigging block though, the ISC block is amazing. Gap Arborist Supply sells an ISC block with a pocket sling on it, which is really nice. They also sell it with just a straight dead eye sling, and I do highly recommend a straight dead eye sling. The ability to get your block cinched up against trunks and things is amazing for eliminating dynamic forces. So keep that in mind. Matthew says I just picked up a safe block. Yeah, they're really handy. They're not bad tools. I found that I personally didn't use it as much as I thought I would, but they aren't bad tools. So let me know what you think of it, Matthew. We'll see. So if you get outside of all of this kind of stuff and then you get into other kinds of equipment come into play like a stump grinder. Is it worth having a stump grinder? Well, most companies here in town don't have stump grinders where I'm at. So I bought a stump grinder specifically because there was only a couple of companies in town that had them. And when I sent people to them to have stump grinding work done, what ended up happening is they would get out on the site and see other trees and end up getting tree work. And the same thing happens with me. People call me out to do a stump grinding. And 2 out of 3 times they have other trees on the property that need pruning as well or whatever. And I can sell them on pruning the trees while I'm out there on stump grinding. But they would have never called me or invited me out to do a bid if I didn't own a stump grinder. So my stump grinder does not really make me money. I hate that thing for stump grinding, to be quite frank. But it is I break even with the stump grinding, but I get work with the tree work, and so it's worth it to me now that I've made it into like a semi mini skid. It's even more practical to me, right? So you know, is a stump grinder worth the value? It would depend. Do you have a guy that can run stumps and do stumps on a regular basis without interrupting tree work? If so, then yeah, maybe. Or do you know that a lot of your clients will hire you to pay your rate for what you need as a base stump cutting charge to make money while you're on the job? Then yeah, it could be. But it may not be. Some guys in town have owned stump grinders and then sold them because they just didn't make enough money on them. So stump grinders are kind of an iffy thing. You have to decide for yourself. But it's always going to come down to that: where is the value for the equipment? How much money are you going to pay for it? How much difficulty is it going to be to use regularly? And then how much profit will it realistically get you after you've estimated your maintenance and repairs, after you've estimated all of the learning curve that goes into it, all that kind of stuff, right? If those three factors meld, then, sorry, yeah, that's not good. I'm yawning on you guys. It's not you guys' fault. I'm just tired. I did a 5-hour dirt bike ride yesterday and I'm still recouping from it. Then the question is, can those things come together and make it practical for you, right? That's what you have to do to evaluate your equipment. And what your needs are. Like, if everything you do is small ornamental tree pruning, then you may not want to buy a stump grinder or a mini skid. I mean, realistically, you may not even need a 36-inch chainsaw on a 36-inch bar on a 661 or an 880. That would be probably unrealistic and stupid for you if you're only doing ornamental. But that's an expensive cost, right? So, yeah, it's all this value that you have to look at. Okay, man, there I go again. Um, Brian at BZ Arbor Care says, I like mine. It's just a little cumbersome, I think. Yes, I agree. He also says, I have a small stump grinder, like the cheapest one you can get. So I can do small stuff like 18 inches or below if it's just a couple. Otherwise, I try to subcontract or rent. Yeah, that's it. You know, I just found that for me, rent was so high that they had to have enough stumps to make rent worth it, or I was turning work away to other people. So for me, considering I only paid $9,000 for the stump grinder, it was totally worth it in that sense. So has gotten me a lot of work and it's been practical. So I hope this conversation about how to evaluate whether you buy equipment or not has helped a little bit. I don't know. It's kind of hard. It's a very specific person and company oriented and specific decision. But hopefully, these are a few principles that are helping you guys to make a better decision. Um, I'd like to know what you think about it. So leave me a comment either here before we go or on the IGTV, or send me a direct message. I would like to know what you guys think about it. If you are interested in helping get uh, to better evaluate what equipment you may or may not want to buy for your company and if it's practical or not, um, contact me. We can do a private consultant. I try not to be overly expensive, but I do charge for it, so know that. And but I can get more into depth about your company, what your market is, and what equipment may or may not be more practical for you. Okay, I don't guarantee anything, but I do guarantee you good concepts to think about for you to hopefully make better decisions. So Brian says, love this topic. Thanks a ton. Yep, no problem. Getting an idea of other business models is a huge value. I agree. I totally agree. I speak to a lot of people in the industry about this stuff. So, hope that this was beneficial for everybody. Thanks for stopping by, and we will do this again. I'm going to try Saturday this week. I don't think I'll be able to do it Friday. So hopefully this coming up Saturday, we'll be able to do another one. And I'll see you guys then. Take care. Be safe. Climb safe. And please, please, please use your PPE. All right.